acknowledge Rachel, who's going to be my wing person. And I said that I wasn't going to say that she's the person who made Biomechanics sexy. So you know that Rachel's worked extensively in secondary and tertiary sectors, highly regarded, highly respected, and she will be my wing person for tonight, who will actually be answering all of your questions, and hopefully we'll have time at the end for the Q&A session. So tonight is not about going through all the different key skills, key knowledge of the new study design. It's the most significant similarities between the existing and the new study design. And it's also about the significant changes that we can be expecting in teaching and learning. So thank you for your participation. So I've just had a look at our second pages that are just amazing. And what I want to do is share some of that throughout tonight. But tonight's not about marketing or sales and the features of the book. But I want to highlight some of the things like through lines that occur throughout units 1 through to 4, and students' reflective folio, and the big emphasis on participation that we certainly have throughout the resource that we're really, really proud of. So as I mentioned, VCE PE explores really, really complex interrelationships. And these two words are going to appear a lot, and you're probably going to see them at a lot of different professional learning sessions: biophysical and psychosocial. And now we're looking at the performance and participation in physical activity, sport and exercise. In a nutshell, Unit 1 and 2, the focus is mainly on participation, so the psychosocial. But there is certainly some biophysical things in there. Obviously, when you're looking at body systems, you're talking about biophysical aspects. Unit 3 and 4, the focus is largely on performance, and therefore it's mainly a biophysical, but there is also some psychosocial elements that need to be covered there. I'm really, really happy to the people, to the review panel, and to the people who actually wrote the study design for having that large emphasis on learning through movement. Practical activities appear as a really, really key part of the new study design. So physical activity, sport, recreation, they can be opportunistic, they can be structured, or they can be investigative of nature. These practical activities don't need to be, you know, a single session or double session in the gym or on a soccer pitch or a netball field. They can be simply 3 or 4 minutes out of a class. What is really, really important is that 20 hours, roughly, per unit is devoted to practical activities. And I think the strong emphasis, and you'll see this in tonight's presentation, in terms of students' reflection and the reflective folio, really puts the onus on us as educators to make sure that we if not exceed that, certainly get very, very close to it. Student reflection is going to occur, and it needs them to link theory and practical experiences. And I often talk, and Rachel often talk about, well, what's the real world meaning of what we're actually learning in class? Because that's where the lifelong learning really, really is going to occur. The new study design really takes a strengths-based approach. And definitely through the reflective folio, students are going to have to look at their experience through their participation in lots and lots of different activities. They need to support the development of their knowledge and cognitive behavioural skills, and really enhance their own and others' health and well-being. So it's not just about our students being lifelong learners, it's about taking peers, taking adults, taking others who they're involved with along on that journey. So there's lots of industry links and lots of links back to allied health fields that a lot of our students will end up finding themselves working in the next 5, 10 plus years. The other real thing about the strengths-based approach is that it actually affirms the value that all students in their communities have strengths, and they need to nurture and improve their own and others' movements, confidence, participation, and performance. And I think you'll see that throughout Unit 1 all the way through to Unit 4, repeated again through lots and lots of different through lines. So let's look into and let's tap into Unit 1, Area of Study 1. And the title is the same: how does the musculoskeletal system work to produce movement? And this is actually about movement being front and center for teaching and learning, and participate is one of the key skills that you'll see throughout Unit 1 and Unit 2, 3 and 4. Students need to participate, not just learn, not just explain, they need to participate. So very, very few changes in Area of Study 1, Unit 1. And this really has a biophysical focus on the body systems. You're talking about the musculoskeletal systems and the cardiorespiratory systems. So having said that this had a psychosocial focus across the whole unit, 1 and 2, there are some biophysical elements. In area study 1, there's actually been a removal of the different types of physical activity. The writers of the study design saw that there was some overlap between Unit 1 and Unit 2 in our current study design, and they've actually reduced that overlap. So I think that's a really big tick to them and to the new study design. The enablers of physical activity are only now covered in Unit 2. Previously it was Unit 1, now it's only in Unit 2. In terms of muscular contraction, there's now been the addition of concentric and eccentric, and I think a lot of you have just done a big fist pump because that's what you taught in the previous study design to 2018. So they've actually returned, but isokinetic has actually been benched, so we don't need to actually teach students about isokinetic contractions. There is higher order understanding that's going to be required to identify the structure and function of body systems. Students need to differentiate the role of agonists, antagonists, and stabilizers. In our current study design, they've simply had to describe. Moving forwards from next year onwards in the new design, they have to actually differentiate and they have to identify and differentiate those different roles and relationships between them, which is a higher order task. And I think it's long been wanted to be added to the new study design. What I have here is, and again from our second page, is just a few things. Learning through movement. Throughout our books, resources, you're going to see a whole lot of pracs. And without going into too much detail, the pracs are then going to be reflected on by students in their reflective folios. So whenever there's a collaboration task, whenever there's a prac activity, you're actually going to get students who are actually tapping into that part of the course. So I'll talk to you about looking forward. So you could be on chapter 1, but it's linked to something down the track, and you might talk about paying it forward as teachers. And we know that when we've got our handle on the study design, we know that how we can integrate and link different parts of the course. Very much a strong part of the new resource is the fact that we've got 2 really key and important through lines, are looking forward and are looking back. So in this particular example, it actually looks at assessment of fitness and test protocols when students are actually looking at that at an earlier stage of their particular coursework. In the musculoskeletal system, interaction, so we talk about muscles and joints, or the skeletal and the muscular system working together. This is actually a really good area where we can actually explore it via the use of lever systems. So some strong links between this and what's happening in Unit 3. Remembering that most of our students conduct that Unit 1, 2, 3, 4 journey. Some of them accelerate and simply take up Unit 3 and 4 at Year 11 or Year 12. And because most levers are third-class levers, this very much has become the focus of the VCAR focus in the new study design. Musculoskeletal injury causes are pretty much the same. However, physiological prevention strategies has actually seen rehabilitation added to the warm-up and cool-down understanding that students actually need. It's actually good to see Shona Jack actually qualify for the Australian swim team. So WADA, the Anti-Doping Authority, actually talk about permitted and prohibited practices. So where we've previously spoken to students or taught about legal and illegal performance enhancement practices, the language now very much is around permitted and prohibited practices. So we're really in lockstep with what's happening in the real world. Ethical and socio-cultural considerations, they've been removed, but they do remain in area of study 2. And again, I'm really, really grateful that the people who put pen to paper and actually wrote the new study design have actually removed that repetition. Previously, it occurred in both area of study 1 and area of study 2, and there's your second fist pump for the night. Sometimes students, their eyes go a little bit glazed when, you know, they're going through the same information again and again, when we really know that they've covered it, they've done it well. Why actually do it repeatedly without any sort of real net value or gain? Each of our chapters starts with a concept map or a mind map. And when I look at the assessment at the end of tonight's presentation, very much students need to present this concept map or mind map when they're formulating an extended written response. So we thought that, and this is not just happening in PE, it's happening in secondary education from 7 all the way through to 12. So we're seeing these sort of key skills being developed a lot earlier on. So why not do it in Unit 1 and have it going all the way through Unit 2, Unit 3, and Unit 4, and not just focusing on it for that Unit 4 new area of Study 3, that extended response. We felt it was really, really important for us to start each conversation or each chapter with a pulse check. So there's 4, 5, 6 roughly pulse check questions. Whereas teachers, we can actually bounce these questions off students and get an idea of where they are at in terms of their previous understanding, previous experiences, and previous learnings. And I'll talk a little bit more about the Nelson Mind Tap in our next webinar, which is the first week back of Term 2. Let's get into Area of Study 2 of Unit 1. And what you see here is that the wording has actually changed. So what role does the cardiorespiratory system play in movement? So very much that is consistent with the Area of Study 1 descriptor. What role does it play in movement? So again, we find that fine-tuning and tweaking. And again, congratulations to the authors of the new study design. Movement occurs in multiple formats. So there's physical activity, there's sport, and there's exercise. And if you actually take your time to read the new study design, which is on the VCA website, you can see specific definitions for each of those key formats. Thermoregulation remains, thank goodness, because it's actually a really, really important part of Unit 3 as well. However, homeostasis, hypothermia, and hyperthermia, apologies for the typo there, where I've repeated myself, hyperthermia and hypothermia, they've all been benched. So we're still going to think about thermoregulation. And we're looking at what happens at rest, and we're looking at what happens during physical activity, sport, and exercise. And again, what is occurring at rest, physical activity, sport, and exercise is pretty much happening throughout the whole study design. Specific examples of cardiovascular and respiratory health have been benched as well. However, when investigating the impact of regular aerobic exercise, both of those systems, the cardiovascular and the respiratory systems, they can be referred to. And when you're talking about improved capacity or improved functioning, don't throw out all the great stuff that you've created as an educator thinking, oh, it's not relevant to the new study design. It certainly is, but it's probably going to be introduced in a very, very different way in 2025. So gene doping has been added to the list of permitted and prohibited substances. Primary data is required, and I should have highlighted primary data. It's required to measure and analyse changes to the cardiorespiratory systems at rest and during different varied movement experiences. So again, this is where students need to physically do the pracs themselves. They need to collect the information. So your heart rates, your respiratory rates, all those other measures that they're then going to use in their analysis. So teachers cannot simply give students a table or a graph and students then use that to show their level of understanding. There is a new skill that's been introduced, and it actually combines, I think, 3 skills from the existing study design. And it's got this umbrella term of the impacts of regular aerobic exercise. So I think, again, the removal of repetition is a real positive moving forwards in the new study design. Social cultural considerations are still there, and it combines the social and cultural considerations from our existing, in this case, the previous study design. Okay, so we've covered Unit 1, and if you've had any questions, I'm sure that Rachel would have answered them. And by the way, through the presentation, if there's a lot of common questions coming through, Rachel's just going to chip in and say, Rob, we need to address this. So please don't hold back with your questions. And for a lot of you, this is re-engaging. You've taken the time to download the new study design, to sort of flick through it, read through it, etc. And the more we do that as educators, the better we're going to get our heads around what we need to do to be the best we can in the new study design. So Unit 1, Area Study 2, how do physical activity, sport and exercise contribute to the healthy lifestyle? So this time sport has actually been explicitly classified as formal and informal, which I think is a really, really good step forward. Similar to previous study design, the different types of physical activity, the benefits of participation, and the social cultural influences are still there, and there are slight tweaks. So the minor alteration and focus is very much psychosocial. The spiritual benefits of physical activity has been added at this area of study. And it's also going to appear a lot in the reflective folios that students are actually going to be completing. And this is where we as educators really have to provide them with guidance. And whether you call them guide questions or whether you call them think about, whatever tag you want to put on them, I think that we're leaving it far too open if we simply ask students to record or reflect on their participation in physical activity or sport or exercise without some sort of direction, because that's where we want them to be moving from a learning perspective. The socio-cultural factors, referred to as enablers and barriers, provide really, really good links to several key areas of our current, or what's going to be the previous study design as we start to teach this in 2025. Did you know, throughout our new resources, we've got a whole lot of these did you know, which are really, really good start conversations before you start a new key knowledge area. They're really, really good to make, I think, the learning real and accessible, so students can see what they're going to do with the knowledge that they're actually going to develop and the skills that they're going to develop. And there you see it again. There you see that concept map, or that mind map, that links together so many different parts of this particular chapter, but there are also broader mind maps that link together different through lines that occur throughout the whole new study design. You've seen the looking back, looking forward. This is the looking back. So this actually gets students to, once they're dealing with some new content area, that they're actually linking it to what they've learned previously. So it's all about scaffolding and building on what they've learned previously. It's almost like a little nudge to students saying, hey, remember when we were looking at, this is what we covered, this is how it's relevant to this part of the study. So the through lines we've tried to make really explicit to both teachers and to students in the resources that we've developed. So prevalence and trends of physical activity, inactivity, and sedentary behaviour at population groups, various population groups, same, that's still there. The physical activity and behavioural guidelines really, really need to be known. However, students need to experience, keyword experience, consider and use rather than know about. So again, I think it's been a shift to a higher sort of expectation from students. So they need to actually experience different objective and subjective tools. So in other words, they've got to use these when they're actually looking at collecting information on physical activity and sedentary behaviour. Again, we can't simply provide students with a case study or information about the tools that are used, the advantages, disadvantages, etc. Students have to experience them, consider and use rather than simply know about. Inactivity is obviously associated with hyperkinetic disease. That term is not used in the new study design, but as educators, we know that it is. It increases the risk of specific health conditions, and the focus is still very much the cardiorespiratory and the musculoskeletal systems currently. However, this has been removed for 2025, at least 4 years. Students are still required to explain the outcomes of inactivity. They need to do a data analysis, and therefore they're going to explore the range of health conditions. So again, we've had the health conditions removed in the new study design, the cardiorespiratory, musculoskeletal, but they're required to explain the outcomes of inactivity. Wearable technology, which now encompasses accelerometry and GPS, which were some of the tools that we used to measure activity and sedentary behaviour. This is the new sort of umbrella term. And again, we see those through lines all the way through to Unit 4, where we talk about wearable technology used in the activity analysis. So I think that's another tick to the right as the new study design, that they've removed that repetition. There's those great through lines. So we're introducing it here in Unit 2, Area Study 1. It'll be revisited in Unit 4, Area Study 1, etc. All right, the social ecological model is the only model that needs to be taught. YPAP has been benched, that's gone. So again, another fist pump. I think I could obviously feel it from people in the background there. So the social ecological model is the only one that needs to be taught or learnt by students, and it needs to be critiqued and from a perspective of increasing physical activity and reducing sedentary behaviour, and again of different population groups. I've bolded the words design and implement. Students are required to design and implement a personal plan for any person. It can be a classmate, it can be a parent, it can be another person. And this is where we see these strong industry links to either personal training, to strength and conditioning, to the allied health professions. And that plan needs to optimize adherence to the National Physical Activity Guidelines. This is where students consider the health-related fitness components. This isn't carried over to Unit 4, where the components are simply known as fitness components. But certainly in this area of study, they need to consider the health-related fitness components and use a physical assessment as a baseline for developing their personalised program for, again, classmate, a parent, a client, another person. To design this personalised plan, they need to conduct an FMA, not a QMA, the qualitative movement analysis. They need to conduct a functional movement assessment that actually targets those health-related fitness components. And I think it's really good that the tools that are used to actually form that assessment are different to the fitness tests that are used in Unit 4, that a lot of teachers are currently going through now with their students in Unit 4, heading into the term 2 holidays. There are some similarities, however. So you still need to think about protocol consistency. You still need to think about socio-cultural factors, the psychosocial, the physiological considerations. Still need to consider health screening as well as informed consent, as well as the tests being valid, reliable, and accurate. So whilst the tests are different, what underpins those tests is still very, very consistent. So those through lines are very, very, very strong. Socio-cultural perspectives are really, really important as the assessment tools for the general population groups for participation in physical activity rather than performance. So again, I mentioned that, you know, if you want to think of it in a nutshell, that Unit 1, 2 is more participatory, Unit 3, 4 is more performance-based. However, those two terms, biophysical and psychosocial, you see them occurring across both of those different units. The personalised plans need to include the use of self-management skills. This is fantastic because by teaching this to students, not only do we hope that they can apply it to a functional movement assessment, we hope that they actually take on board some of these self-management skills. So skills that are certainly not limited to, but can include goal setting, skills that self-management skills that look at setting rewards or incentives or time management or being more self-aware. Those are all really, really strong positives that look at that strength-based approach in the new study design. So I'm really, really excited this has been included in the requirement in the development of personalised plans, and I hope that you share that as well. Area study 2. What are the contemporary issues associated with physical activity and sport? So again, not a lot of changes in this particular area. The title is the same, but this is where the psychosocial aspects of participation and the biophysical aspects sort of come together. This is where they come together. And this is where, as educators, we need to really take the pulse or really sort of suss out what are our students interested in, what's going on around us, either nationally, what's going on around us internationally, etc. So not only can we tap into levels of interest and great resource information, but we've also can ensure maximum engagement. The only real proviso I think that I could see in the documentation from VCA is that the contemporary issue is linked to participation in physical activity. As I said, that there's either a local, national, or international sort of focus from a sporting perspective. And as we currently do, the implications can be considered from a historical, current, and or future perspective. So teachers, I think, and as professionals, I know that you and I know that we are going to really take into consideration, you know, the students that we're working with and where we're going to take this whole contemporary issue investigation. The new key knowledge points which inform teachers about the contemporary issue appear under 2 classifications. Again, this is very, very explicit. Interpersonal and intrapersonal classifications. So gene doping, I think, is something that's going to be really, really interesting, especially with the Paris Olympics. I think we're going to find things coming out, not necessarily at Paris, but potentially in the months and years following it, that there's been some of this going on, and etc. So if that's somewhere you want to take your students with the contemporary issue, certainly do that. Throughout our resources, whenever we introduce key terms, whenever we introduce command terms, that will appear there in the glossary section. We've also got areas of our resource where we actually unpack, and we actually have got what we call worked examples. So a little bit more about Nelson MindTap. We've actually got some worked examples in terms of the contemporary issues. We've got some worked examples in terms of that FMA, in terms of the QMA. More on this in the next presentation in term 3. Interpersonal, so things like geographic location, the safeguarding of athletes, especially from a coaching perspective, and coaches making sure that they're acting appropriately and professionally. Sports media influences, there's a whole lot that you can dab your toe into in terms of inclusion and equity around different population groups. The intrapersonal looks at things such as the hormonal considerations and for the prescription of physical activity, injuries and safety. I know that a lot of you have run with those. And again, don't throw those out. Simply modify, fine-tune, engage with students. And certainly if we find that there are injuries that are prevalent at the moment, and I think at the moment we're looking at injuries that are around concussion. I think there's a lot of contact injuries that are occurring in AFL as they are in netball and rugby league. So there's a lot of rich data there that we can sort of tap into. Contemporary issues around some psychological skills, including sleep, physical activity, and mental fitness. I love that term, mental fitness. And we certainly can explore the responsibilities of the elite sport pathway. So what happens in terms of the mental fitness of athletes, coaches, etc. And I want to acknowledge Monique Sharp for sort of her guidance in this area. I sort of said to Monique, look, Monique, can you give me a bit of input to the interpersonal, intrapersonal, and what you're going to be doing with your classes and how you see this unpacking? So acknowledgement and thanks to Monique Sharp. In the key knowledge point, I think it was subtle. It certainly hasn't been bolded as I have. The words such as appear, which I think gives us the license that we can select one or more from the list. And again, based on class interest, class size, and the ability of us as educators to support students effectively. So you can choose one, or you can choose more than one. I think that's what such as opens up in the new study design. You've seen these before, the real world applications. And if you're looking at some of these second page sort of examples, and I've chosen injury rehabilitation. There's a whole lot of videos that accompany injury rehabilitation. The colors just are so engaging. I showed some students that I taught last year who are using our current editions, this particular slide, and they thought, wow, it just pops. So lots and lots of engagement, lots of graphs that students can actually refine some of their skills with as well. Let's get into Unit 3, how are movement skills improved? So something a little bit different, and I know this is something that Rachel actually wrote on and spent a lot of time researching. So linear and non-linear theories of skill acquisition. So we're familiar with the terms direct and constraint-based approach. However, linear and non-linear theories is something that we as educators have to really get our heads around and communicate to students. Task constraints are still really, really relevant, and you can certainly apply task constraints to linear and non-linear theories. Previous Unit 4 content, we had psychological skills such as motivation, confidence, optimal arousal, concentration, all the sort of stuff that we got our students to sort of do in that term 3 holiday by themselves. This has now got, I think, greater importance, and it's actually been moved to area of study 1. So we can't simply sort of set and forget and expect students to learn this by themselves. This is going to have a lot more integration around direct and constraints-based coaching and those linear and non-linear theories. Part and whole practice has been added to the types of practice. And again, there's a fist pump there, because when we're looking at different types of practice, whether it's whole, distributed, mashed, a lot of us talk about whole and part, and then we realize, hang on, it's not accessible. But students want to know about whole and part practice. So now we very much do have to include it. Again, a strong and a greater emphasis on primary data collection, and students have to actually participate in practical activities that actually tap into each of those bullet points there, the stages of learning, skill classifications, motivational levels, etc. Biomechanics has been reduced. Maybe there's a fist pump there from a lot of you there. So it's what I'm really happy about, and I know that Rachel is, because for the person who made biomechanics sexy, that biomechanics has been made a lot more user-friendly. So when biomechanics is taught like physics, we get students with their eyes that are glassed over, and we find it really difficult to keep them engaged and interested. When we teach biomechanics with some real-world context and real-world application, as you saw in our resources, they get it. They see how it's used, and they want to then actually engage with that particular thing. So Newton's laws are essentially focusing on linear motion. Angular momentum has been benched. Okay, so we don't have to talk about, Newton's laws being applied to angular motion. It's more to do with linear motion. However, torque is still explicitly stated, and angular motion understanding is very much still required. Another fist pump there. If you're reading ahead, distance and displacement has been benched. It's something I think that we might teach to a Year 10 sports science class or earlier, but certainly we didn't see a lot of application around students knowing what's the difference between the two of those, and why do we need to put a vector when we're talking about velocity, etc. In Unit 3, Area Study 1, the lever understanding has been limited to third-class levers. We still need to talk about first and second-class levers, as we did in Unit 1, when we're talking about the musculoskeletal systems creating movement, but the lever understanding has been limited to third-class levers. And the impact and the focus very much has changed to be around what happens when you change the force arm and the resistance arm, and what that does to mechanical advantage. I'm going to talk at the end of the presentation about some structured questions and other forms of assessment, but the structured questions for this area of study need to be based on practical activities. Again, we can't simply give students a whole lot of data and then have a lot of questions that look at their understanding of skill acquisition and biomechanical principles. So again, that learning through movement is really, really, really important. For what it's worth, we went out to market, or the team at Cengage went out to market, and they actually asked them, what's on your wish list? And whilst they love our current resources, they felt it was better if we actually broke the chapters up into modules, into more manageable chunks. So a very, very significant change from our perspective is we've actually got modules rather than one extended chapter. And you'll see a lot of these features mentioned in the next presentation on July 16. Let's look at area of study 2 in Unit 3. How does the body produce movement? So physical activity has quite deliberately replaced sport and exercise. And this actually increases the type of movement experiences that we can take our students through. And it actually means that we can actually take our students through a lot of recreational-based practical classes and a broader range of movements. Energy system teaching and learning, pretty much same. And I've used this as an opportunity to report or to share with you that the assessor report actually indicated there is still large room for improvement when students are actually explaining and showing their understanding of interplay. The muscular fatigue factors remain fuel depletion, accumulation of byproducts, and thermoregulatory fatigue. However, students are now required to consider individual, which can include training and nutrition, to what we need to teach students about The nutritional and the hydration strategies have shifted from Unit 4, and their application is a lot broader now. So now we can look at carbohydrate ingestion, we can look at the use of protein, we can look at water and how they're used to enhance performance, delay fatigue, and improve recovery. So I think a lot of us were just waiting to dip into those sort of areas, but because it wasn't assessed either in coursework or in the exam, we sort of held back a little bit. But this is all really rich information that really makes the new study design even more engaging for us as teachers and for students as learners. I'm going to go through this one, but I've already highlighted that whenever there's a command word in any of the sort of questions, be it a chapter review question or a module review question, we actually think it's really important that students understand that suggest, what are they actually required to do when they need to suggest how this contributes to improve lactate inflection point? What does the command mean? Justify, etc. So you'll see this appearing throughout each of the chapters. Not each and every time the command words are used. We've used it just through there to highlight those command words and what students need to do with them in questions. All right, moving well, and hopefully we'll have some questions at the end. Unit 4, Area of Study 1. What are the foundations of an effective training program? And a lot of students are currently learning about the activity analysis, about fitness components, about designing a training program probably at the start of term 3. So this sees a return. The previous study design actually required students to undertake an activity analysis. This actually sees a return to students having to undertake that analysis. This is significant, and this is real world learning. So it includes students observing and or digitally recording their classmates, either accessing local teams or elite performers if they can. The shortcut for us as teachers would be to simply give students the data that we can, download from various resources. Data cannot be given to students without their engagement in the activity analysis process. The only thing I think that we can do is if we've got a video of a performance where the performer is in screen 100% of the time, we can give that to students, but they then have to undertake the activity analysis. Okay, so there's no real shortcuts here. It's learning through doing very much. So students need to determine the physiological requirements associated with an activity, and they need to consider the fitness components, energy systems, muscle groups, and how those muscle groups actually bring about movements and actions. Specificity is one of those principles that I believe, and I think it appears throughout Unit 3, Unit 4, even in the Unit 1, that really underpins the selection of fitness tests and training activities. So if you're thinking about specificity, this is something where you can actually embed that. How muscles are involved in movements during performance and replicating these in training are really important considerations. I'm going to go through that, and again, I'm going to save this for next time because I do want to answer some questions. And Rachel, hopefully you've got some as well. Students don't need to learn fitness components definitions. They don't need to rote learn them and commit them to memory. However, they need to understand how the components are applied to movements when they justify their selection of fitness tests. So again, that concept of specificity, linking it to the analysis and the energy systems and the movements and the actions that are being observed. Students no longer, here's another fist pump coming up, students no longer need to rote learn fitness test methodology of 2 tests for each component. And I know that takes up, it causes so much stress and anxiety for us as teachers and them as students. However, students need to participate in the testing process, and they need to, again, this is a little bit different. This is from a performance lens. They need to demonstrate understanding of the protocols, the validity, the reliability, and accuracy that are required by fitness tests. Very different to that functional movement analysis that occurred back in Unit 2. The components of reaction time and body composition are important, but not necessarily at the level that students are considering it at VCE. So those 2 have been benched. There's a broader or umbrella term, health screening, and it actually replaces the more specific PAR-Q. And there are multiple health screen tests available. And because PAR-Q is one of them, again, don't throw this out. PAR-Q is a health screening measure or test, and it's still relevant, it's still appropriate. However, PARQ is not specified in the new study design. It's simply one of those health screening tools that students and teachers can actually consider. Looking forward, looking back, there's that strong link again to through lines between the study design, and you'll see this throughout Unit 1, 2, 3, 4. More about this at a later date. Doing really well, I think. We've got one more area of study after area of study 2, because there is area of study 3, newly introduced. So how is training implemented effectively to improve fitness is basically the title of this. We've heard about wearable technologies, and this includes a broad range of tools. Now, I think the writers of the study design have really future-proofed it. So they haven't specified specific measurement tools or digital technologies, wearable technologies, etc. Wherever this goes, and it's evolving rapidly, I think that it can be kept current. Tapering is a new principle. This is one of the significant principles that has been added to this particular area of study. You can teach this alongside nutritional strategies to enhance performance. So when you're talking about, for example, carbohydrate loading, tapering very much is really important that those two occur in sync. One of my likes, and I like this occurring in our study design, but it doesn't yet. It might 5 years down the track, etc. So I like the whole notion of periodization. I like big picture. Students think about big picture planning. Periodization is used in New South Wales, West Australia, and Queensland, but it's not used in Victoria. So the reason I put it there is that sometimes when you talk about tapering, you want to link it to different parts of a training year, pre-season, in-season, off-season. We don't need to do that for the new study design. Chronic adaptations are explicitly listed, and you need to think about the adaptations that improve VO2 max, lip, speed and force of muscle contractions, and lactate tolerance. They're the go-to. They're the 4 go-to areas that chronic adaptations have to focus on. And you can see that it's really good because they actually tap into all 3 energy systems. They tap into different fiber types, slow and fast twitch, and I'll talk a little bit more about different types of fast twitch soon. The reflective folio, and again, you've got lots of digital support. Nelson MindTap, we'll go through that another day. So the reflective folio needs to collect the physiological, psychological, and sociological data during the participation in training sessions. So ideally, while students are actually doing it during a break, when you take a break to provide them with free feedback or instruction, ideally within a short period after that they participated in that particular prac or training session, this is what needs to occur. All parts of a training session, students need to understand and participate in learning through movement. They need to participate in warm-up. They need to participate in the different training methods that formulate the conditioning stage, and they also need to participate in cool down. So multiple training methods, they can occur in the same prac. I know that many of us teach different training methods or go through different training methods within the same prac session, ideally in a double. However, they can occur across multiple practical sessions, and ideally, the application of relevant training principles should also be taught at that particular time. In the case study, this is one of the assessment tasks. Students need to draw on their experiences of at least 5 different training sessions, and they need to design a personalised 6-week training program for themselves, another person, client, or sports person. So there are those through lines that we saw, students needing to design a personalised program to improve physical activity and reduce sedentary behaviour in Unit 2. In Unit 4, they have to actually do it to actually improve performance. Okay, the new area of study in Unit 3. We don't need to teach any new content, but we do need to teach new skills. So the extended response is very much a new assessment task, but you've probably seen, or you will see rather, when I go through the assessment at 1, 2, 3, and 4, that there's an extended response that occurs a lot earlier on, not just at Unit 4. It's going to occur all the way through VCE Physical Education. So the focus very much is there on integrating and interdisciplinary learning, those through lines that I like to refer to. And because most students undertake that 1, 2, 3, 4 journey, there's lots of opportunities through Unit 1 and 2 for teachers to actually develop these skills. So what do students have to do? Area of Study 3 requires students to integrate theory and prac to analyse the links between skill act, biomech, energy production, and training, and the impacts these have on performance. And before you sort of pull your hair out and think, well, how big is this task going to be? I think there's some definite guidelines, and there's some sort of, you know, bumpers there to protect us as teachers and students as learners. So teachers can implement Area Study 3 in either of these two ways. So students can participate in a prac, and it can occur anytime during Unit 3 or Unit 4. And they're obviously going to refer to this in their reflective folio. The prac focuses on one movement skill, the performance of which is then compared to another individual comparing the same skill. So almost like, you know, compare the pair. You've all seen that sort of commercial, compare the pair. So this is one movement skill that they're comparing between themselves and a peer. Great for collaboration, great for class discussion. Or students can actually complete two different movement skills. So this time it can occur again at any time during Unit 3 or any time during Unit 4, but these time they are two different movement skills, and they've recorded these in their reflective folio. So as educators, we're going to select one of two specific elements from 4 discipline areas: skill act, biomech, energy production, and training. So one or two specific elements is going to be the focus of the response. And students actually, this is where they need to use that planning tool. So when they've been using our resources throughout and they've got those concept maps and those mind maps that show those links, this is what students need to do. They need to actually use that tool, a planning tool, concept map, mind map, and they then refer to that in their extended response. It's almost like students writing an English essay. So before they actually start putting pen to paper and writing the essay, they put down their main ideas. They put down the links that they want to have in their introduction, the main body, and the conclusion of their essay. So very much, there's a lot of planning that students have to demonstrate via concept map or mind maps. I spoke about fast twitch fibers. We know that there are two types of fast twitch. Fast twitch A, fast twitch B, type 2A, type 2B, purely anaerobic, partially aerobic. Now, this is beyond the scope of the study design. However, as educators, we tend to teach this to students. Do they need to know this for the SAC or for the end of year exam assessment? No. So wherever we've included additional information in any of our resources, Unit 1, 2, 3, or 4, and it's beyond the scope of the study design, we've actually made it quite explicit. These form great class discussions. These actually extend students. These engage students with more real-world learnings and real-world application, because they're going to ask you, well, what about the different types of fast twitch fibers? And I think we can't say, well, forget about those. You really don't need to know about those for the exam or for the SAC. Rather than doing that, say, look, this is beyond the scope of the study design. However, because guess what? Our students who go on to further study and who are going to work in allied health, they're going to come across these things. Why not prepare them with these whilst they're going through Year 11 and Year 12 PE? Assessment. I've got about 10 minutes. I'm going to try and go through this fairly quickly. There's some great summaries in the study design that occur at the end of those particular sections. So Unit 1 and 2, assessment is very much school-based, and teachers determine whether a student has displayed a satisfactory level of completion. So Area of Study 1, Unit 1, how does the musculoskeletal system work to produce movement? So on the completion of the unit, students should participate in, there's that participate in, and analyse a variety of practical activities. They then have to explain how the musculoskeletal systems function together to produce movement. This is also where they evaluate the use of performance enhancement substances and methods. So the first one they actually do themselves, they experience. We don't expect them to actually experience any of those prohibited practices. For Area Study 2, what role does the cardiorespiratory system play in movement? And again, on the completion of this unit, students participate in and analyse various prac activities, refer back to the reflective folio, and they explain how the cardiorespiratory systems work together hand in glove. And again, how those performance enhancement substances and methods impact those particular body systems. For Unit 1, they've got to demonstrate 2 outcomes. So this is mandated. For outcome 1 and 2, the students need to complete a written report, and again, analysing their participation in 4 physical activities, and you can do the rest of the reading. Additionally, this is where the flexibility occurs. You can choose any of those 6 bulleted tasks to assess performance in outcome 1 and outcome 2. And you might see there the 4th bullet point down, an extended response that uses a visual planning tool. I've got no data, and I know that VCA will probably have this data next year, at the end of next year. I think a lot of teachers are actually going to get students to actually use that extended response as a way to develop those skills really, really early on. I think we're going to see a lot more visual presentations, such as annotated posters or concept mind maps, etc. Students who do PE typically do bio, typically do health and HD, typically do psych in their mix of 5 or 6 studies. And some of those studies actually look at that annotated poster or digital presentation. So I think we're going to see a lot more of this happening in Unit 1 and 2. So again, for Unit 2, Outcome 1, there is a mandated task. And this mandated task is the written plan or multimedia presentation that actually looks at increasing physical activity levels and or reducing sedentary behaviour for individuals of a selected population group. Okay, and this is based on their reflections of participation in some of those strategies themselves. They have to physically participate in some of those strategies themselves during prac time in front of us in class. Outcome 2, what are the contemporary issues? I think we're familiar with that. There's no real significant changes. This has required an extended response. This is great practice for the new Unit 4 Area of Study 3. But again, I think that this is where we might see some teachers using the visual presentation, annotated poster, concept mind map, and could even be a physical simulation. Some of our kids are getting really, really good with the way that they're looking at simulations and animations. All right, school assessed coursework for Unit 3. This is worth 20%. And I don't want to make this too mathematical, but there's different weightings for Unit 3 and Unit 4. That's not to say that one unit is more important than the other, and we don't want to convey that to students in any shape, way, or form. Unit 3, Area Study 1, students are able to analyse primary data. This is information that they've collected during participation in physical activity, sport, and exercise. There's that subtle difference that actually allows them to refine movements and looks at it from a biomechanical perspective as well. So this, we are going to expect students to form their understanding or show their understanding based on structured questions linked to primary data they've collected. Area Study 2, very similar to what we currently teach. For those of you who are going to teach it for the first time, it's a laboratory report that's based on primary data. And again, it doesn't have to be a lab. A lot of teachers have been using pracs rather, something like the phosphate recovery test. You don't need to do that. It can actually be an acute response to exercise, but it's got to be primary data. So it links the acute response, the energy system interplay, involvement, fatigue and recovery considerations as well. Unit 4 contributes 30%, and that 30% has got different weightings. So please bear with me, and you don't need to take out a calculator, just bear with me. So what are the foundations of an effective training program? So after students have actually undertaken an activity analysis and they've justified the inclusion of their fitness tests in the assessment of fitness, they need to come up with a written report. And this SAC is worth 25 out of 110 marks. In Area Study 2, they actually have to be able to participate in a variety of training methods. And again, they need to refer back to at least 5 of the pracs in their reflective folio. So this is how they're actually going to evaluate training programs, explain performance improvements, think about chronic adaptations. And these are all going to be very, very different depending on the type of training they've undertaken and what students are going to actually be presented with. In this case, it's a case study. It's a mandated case study that draws on their experiences. And they have to design a 6-week training program. We're going back to pre-current study design. This is what it was in the previous study design. Heavier weighting, 40 out of 110. The second SAC is actually a response in one or two of formats. Either a case study, you can go with another case study, or a data analysis or structured questions. Structured questions at the moment is one of the go-to, but I certainly encourage teachers to think about all three of these as being options and tailoring it to what you have in front of you in terms of the cohort. So we're going to link chronic adaptations at the cardiovascular, respiratory, and muscular systems. We're going to link those adaptations to training methods and the improvements that actually occur. Area study 3. Okay, area study 3, the integrated movement experiences. So students have to integrate theory and prac, and they have to analyse the interrelationships between skill act, biomech, energy production and training, and the impacts they have on performance. We know they need to refer to their reflective folios. We know that they've got to draw on personal experiences, and you can read the rest. The emphasis should be placed on using a suitable tool such as a concept or a mind map to plan that response. Practice this in Unit 1, practice it in Unit 2, practice it in Unit 3. So by the time they get to here, and certainly in the end of year exam, the extended response based on this concept or mind map is really, really rock solid. More information coming down the pipe from VCAR soon, and I don't know when, but I believe that this might even come out early in term 3. The weighting for this is 25 out of 110 marks. So I've tried to go through the most significant similarities and differences in the new study design. There's more support. A lot of you registered for Energize, which is on the 15th of August. It's a massive conference. You're going to be working with people such as Rach. You're going to be working with people, so I'll be there. Monique's going to be there. You've got Chris Clark, who's going to be there. So we're actually going to be spending the whole day looking at the new study design, looking at how we can best teach it, assess it, and engage with it as educators and certainly with our students. There's What's New videos, and all you've got to do is go to the VCAR 2025 tab, and these videos are there for HHD and for PE. There are going to be a couple of VCAR webinars in August, and registration is currently open. And when you register, there's also the opportunity to ask some questions. I know that Chris Clark has been really, really generous in his time. Whenever I've phoned him, he gets back to me if he's not in a meeting pretty quickly. What Chris would like to do, he would like to have a whole bank of questions from people such as ourselves that he can then present once to everybody. So rather than talk to Rob, talk to Monique, talk to Rachel, talk to Brian, talk to Tran, talk to Sophie as educators, he wants all the questions to come in and for him to address it at once. And it could even be a Q&A that is put up on the VCAR website. I'll leave that to Chris. But if you do have specific questions, please submit them to Chris if you are not going to attend any of the VCAR webinars. He is very generous. He is very much feet on the ground. He is an ex-teacher, so he's not based in theory. He is based in practice as well. You've got his email there. Please give him a call. So what I might do now is I might hand over to Anne-Marie, and then we'll have Anne-Marie from Cengage. So Anne-Marie, if you'd like to take the mic.
Thanks so much, Rob. You certainly should have a big glass of water after all that talking. That was a jam-packed, very informative session. Thank you so much. We are so excited and proud to bring this new edition of Nelson PE to schools, created by an expert author team, a student-friendly companion for VCE, everything you need to engage and help your students succeed. So this will be really brief because it's this time of evening and people need to jump out and do different things. But the options available to you for book listing are print and digital for Nelson PE 1 and 2, 3 and 4, $86.95, or digital only $49.95. And I guess the really amazing news is that these resources will be available in October 2024. So everything you need for planning early. Next slide. Rob, could you just
Sorry,
move
yes,
to the next
sorry,
slide?
Yep.
I should also mention too that the complimentary teacher copies are available to book listing schools also. And then we have, there was a question in the chat around the workbooks. So we have the Nelson Physical Education for PE Peak Performance workbooks. Much loved, practical, designed for students to write in, lots of opportunity for practical support. And these are available at $32.95. Again, availability nice and early, everything for planning in October. And next slide, please, Rob. So I guess lastly, I just encourage you to reach out to your friendly learning consultant for any queries or to forward book a meeting time in term 3. We are here to support you with any queries around the series. There's myself, Gillian Lim, and Jude Foster. Thank you so much.